right, today I'm going to show you guys how to do an underpainting in oil. So we're going to learn how to do this by studying a pear. We're going to use a block of wood that's already been primed, gessoed, so that it's ready to go for you. The first steps that you're going to need to do is actually sketch out the pear. I've provided some images for you. One is an actual photograph and one's been edited so that you guys can see both. But really, you could have a pear in front of you, you could have a different image of a pear, that'd be just fine. Either way, it's your reference. And you're simply going to sketch it out with your pencil. So I lightly kind of sketched it out. I didn't erase at all. You don't want to erase on this block of wood. You'll notice my scratchy lines. And from that point, I then used India ink. So if I use straight India ink, it would be too black and too bold. So it's watered down India ink with a dip pen, a metal nib. So the reason why we ink it is I'm about to coat this with oil paint. And if I were to do that and it was only pencil lines, the pencil lines would be gone. So we want to make sure those lines stay, and this would be true with any painting you're doing. If you want to see those details, for example, a portrait or a still life, and you've drawn it all out, the paint is going to eliminate that. It's going to rub away where the pencil lines were, so we use a muted India ink, because I don't want it to look like bold Sharpie lines. I just want to know where the lines are. Okay, so pencil line sketch, then I've done watered down India ink to draw my line out. And at that point, I'm ready to do my underpainting. So let's switch and talk about what that's going to look like here. So here's some finished examples of where this is going. An underpainting sets up your oil painting in a style that has high contrast. So we're talking extreme darks and lights. It also is a 2-layer painting, meaning I do the entire painting 2 times. One time in a burnt sienna, which is the color we're about to use, and another time with the full color on top. This one's got a little more green in it, same idea. You still see some of the underpainting shining through when it's all said and done. You simply heighten your highlights and lowlights over the top to finish it out. So I'm going to put these aside and talk about materials. So we have our paint thinner, and we've been talking about keeping this safe and being aware of the material. You don't want to stir it up, you don't want to have your brush go all the way to the bottom, and we want to be mindful of the potential risks with that. So not dipping anything other than what we're using into the container. I'm also wearing a smock on purpose because this gets really messy, and I always stain my clothes with oil paint. You'll need at least a couple of rags. I have my palette set up with just burnt sienna and a brush nearby ready to go, which is for the second part. Okay, so I've got my burnt sienna, I've got my paint thinner. That's all I need to start, except for my rag. All right, so let's switch screens here. Okay, so this is how we're going to learn to wrap it. So I use my 2 fingers and I wrap the rag so that I have control as I'm about to be very precise with how I use the rag. If it's more comfortable to do that a different way for you with one, or just simply have the whole hand, that's fine. That's just my preferred method as I go into it. I like to use the white rag because I like to see what I'm doing. So again, here's my paint thinner. I'm gonna tip, try to show you on both cameras, tip and dip. And I've got it on my rag. You can see it's saturated there. And I'm going to get the paint kind of moving. And you don't want it too watered or too liquidy. It's not water. And you can see I'm ready to go. All right, so at this point I'm going to coat the entire thing. I find it easier just to stand. So I'm looking for a pretty dark tone. Let me coat this whole thing. and I don't want any streaks the best I can. It's a little bit watery, so I'm gonna go back over. Dark is good. So again, I don't want like big chunks like that. I don't want that type of effect. I want to have it be as smooth as possible. Now, the more I touch it, there's still gonna be some streaks, but as much as possible. On a canvas, you would do the sides. This is a piece of wood. I don't need to do that, but typically you would rub the sides with it as well. Okay, so once we've coated, now we're going to do removal of the highlights. And again, for this particular image, highlights would be almost the entire background around that shadow, and I'm going to remove here and fade. So that's where I'm going to start. I'm going to grab another section that's clean and my brush. So at this point, I'm going to be dipping and applying just paint thinner. So again, just the jar, the paint thinner here. There's no oil involved in this process. So I dip. First I'll do some background so you can get the idea. So I'm applying pure paint thinner, nothing else. Clean spot on my rag. And I press, and the harder I press, the cleaner I can get it. Let's say I want to do a fade. I could by just mixing what's there, but again, if you go over it clean, I'll simply remove. So already getting that shape taking form. If I want this to be more white, I apply more paint thinner and find a clean spot on my rag, like that. So I would keep going there with my background. I'm getting some strange fingerprints I don't like. We'll just kind of wipe that off as we go. All right, back into, so I would do that entire background. Let's do this area though. Apply it. I'm looking at the highlight of my image and it kind of fades this way. So applied. This should not be super accurate yet. We will have a second part where we go back in with the brush. And I can use what's right there and swirl it around to start being kind of the fading. Now the direction in which I'm doing this matters. This is a curved shape, so I'm mimicking that as I go. I keep getting fingerprints, but I'm gonna fix that in a little bit. I don't want to remove all of it. So what should be left at this point is your mid-tones. And that's for you to decide what is a mid value. Not our true blacks. I'm taking away all the highlight. And you have artistic discretion here. You can decide if you want the whole background removed, or maybe this is going to be sitting on a surface. I could do that. Maybe I'll do that. So I'm going to make this like it's sitting on a table because I'm the artist and I can. You can always go over it if you want it to be more white in certain areas. And again, notice my edges are pretty fuzzy. They're not very clean yet. They will be when I go back in with some brush work. Again, clean spot on my rag, the best I can. A little highlight back here I'm going to get. When you're only painting with one color and thinner, it starts to act a little bit like watercolor if you have some experience with watercolor. There's going to be a shadow there, so I'm going to try to Okay, at this point I've removed majority of my highlights. I'm ready to go. You have to remove your highlights, your whites, in the same day, otherwise it'll be dry. So again, removed all the background in this case. I've removed here and here, that's considered a highlight. Where the light is hitting is what I've removed. So, next part is painting in the darks. This part I'm gonna sit down for. As long as I'm on my screen, we're good. So painting in my darks, and again, this is my reference here. I'm going to be painting in this part here and then fading it with my brush. So a little bit of paint. And this part should be a lot more precise. This is the step that doesn't have to happen in the same day. The removal has to happen in the same day. So if you coat it and you don't have enough class time left, you need to be aware of the time. Make sure you get those highlights removed in the same day you apply the oil all over. So again, painting in what you would consider true black. Just like any oil painting, you want to have multiple brushes available. In this case, I can clean off my bristles as well and use that as a blender. So I'm pulling that edge. Notice I'm not going back to the beginning here. I want to pull that edge and use it as a dusting, kind of feathering mechanism where I'm pulling the paint but not very much of it. You'll notice it's getting less and less and less as I go across, but I still want to leave that pure white for the highlight. So I have no paint in my bristles. And if it starts to carry too much, back it up with your rag. There we go, even less. And again, just kind of fading, moving it around without bringing any paint. So remembering a value scale, essentially. The shadow underneath is going to be really important, so I'm going to edge that. And again, same thing. Visit my paint thinner, clean out my brush. I want to blur the edge here, so it's not so crisp. Again, anytime I carry too much paint, I visit my rag. All right, continuing to detail. If I feel like any of these edges need some spotting, I'll make it clean at this point. And you can see why we don't go very bold on that original India ink line. We don't want to see it, and it's starting to show a little bit, even with my muted color. So let's say I go a little too far, which I did right there. You can still, as long as it's still wet, it's still the same day, you can remove with that thinner remove. So anytime you apply that, I can always kind of erase essentially and back it up. back to that highlight. In fact, I do want to add a little more right here, so I'm going to do that as well. So a little bit of a dance back and forth between tones, and this one needs to be lighter, this one needs to come over a little more. I'm using my rag to actually move it around quite a bit. You can see I'm kind of bringing that mid-tone in there. And making sure that at the end, the darks have very little paint thinner and are pure paint here. That's the part that'll take the longest to dry, and that's okay. Last but not least, a little touch up there. Okay, so what we have is an underpainting. This needs to completely dry. I might clean a little bit more of that edge up and kind of clean up what the background smudges of my finger, just to make it nice and pure. But that's essentially what we need to do for layer one. Totally dries. We're going to seal that when it is dry, and then we'll start coating what is the top layer. So again, same thing I just did. You'll notice the removal, and what happens is when I put white over that, it's even more extreme in terms of contrast. So that's the style we're going for on an underpainting. High contrast, super dark and super light type of a look. And the top color will still have its own look to it. This whole painting won't be this brown burnt sienna color. That's simply what helps heighten it underneath. So we can leave some portions of it. It does